In the previous year, the Gemara told us that a kav be'arba amos is considered scattered, and therefore if you find that amount of grain in a threshing floor, in a threshing place, the finder is allowed to keep that amount of grain. Now the Gemara is going to pose a series of questions that these questions really are touching on the issue of what exactly is meant by a kav be'arba amos. What is it measuring? And one of the things that we're going to appreciate from this discussion and these questions that Rabbi Yirmia is going to ask is that the Gemara really is encouraging us and is giving us the tools to analyze, that is, to look at one situation from different perspectives. And the Gemara is about to do that with this series of questions. In the illustration, we see the area depicted by the black square. That is an amount of arba amos, of 4 amos by 4 amos, which again is about 8 feet by 8 feet. And the blue dots represent the amount of grain that is scattered within this area. And that represents an amount of a kav, which is about 2.5 pints of grain. So the question becomes the following. We know that a kav be'arba amos belongs to the finder because we assume that the owner will not return. The question is why? Is it because the amount of grain is not enough, is not substantial enough to justify the effort of coming back to pick it up? Or is it because the area is too large and therefore the amount of work involved in picking up that amount of grain is too much work to justify the effort? So is kav be'arba amos measuring the amount of value, that the value is not significant and that's why the owner will not come back? Or is it perhaps the fact that it is measuring the amount of work involved and the work is determined by the area over which the grain is scattered? So for example, one of the questions that the Gemara is going to focus on is the following. We're going to look, well, what happens if we have a chatzi kav b'shtei amot? If we have half the amount, half a kav, scattered over a smaller area? Well, here we have less value. So if we look at the value, then we should conclude that the owner will not come back because that's less value than kav be'arba amos. On the other hand, if we look at it as a measurement of work, well, this is only 2 amot. If we focus on the fact that the area is smaller, well, that means that there is less work involved in picking up the grain and therefore the owner would come back because it's less work. The second question the Gemara is going to ask is the opposite. What happens if it's kavayim, which is 2 kavim, but they are spread over a larger area? It's shmone amot. It's 8 amot by 8 amot. So the amount of grain is double, but the amount of work is double. So again, if we look at the amount of value, well, this is a lot more value. So if we look at it from the perspective of value, we should conclude that the owner will come back. But on the other hand, if we look at kav be'arba amos as being primarily a measure of the effort involved, and the effort is determined by the area, well, this area is much, much larger, is double the amount of kav be'arba amos, and therefore if the owner will not come back because of the work involved in 4 amot, he certainly will not come back, for the amount of work involved in 8 amot is much greater. So this is the type of questions that the Gemara is about to ask. These are 2 of them, and we're going to see that there's 2 additional questions. Now let's read the Gemara inside. By Rabbi Yirmia. Rabbi Yirmia asked, Chatzi kav b'shtei amos mahu? What is the halacha if one finds half a kav spread over an area of 2 amos? Kav be'arba amos tamamai. What is the reason that you're allowed to keep 1 kav in 4 amos? Mishum de nafesh tirchayu. Is it because 1 kav in 4 amos represents a lot of work? Well, chatzi kav b'shtei amos, since this represents a smaller area, kevon de lo nafesh tirchayu, it's less work, lo mafker lehu. Therefore, the owner will not make it ownerless. He intends to come back. O dilma, or perhaps, mishum de lo chashivi, Or is it because a kav in an area of 4 amos is not chashuv, is not important enough? If that's the reason, then v'chatzi kav ishte amos, if you were to find only a half kav of a kav in 2 amos, keven de lo chashivi, since they're less important, is less value, mafker lehu, then we should assume that the owner does make him ownerless. He abandons them, and therefore the finder can keep him. So the process that the Gemara is pursuing is comparing these cases back to the case of kav be'arba amos, because kav be'arba amos is the rule, that's the standard, that we know you're allowed to keep. The question is, how do we exactly understand that rule? And depending on how do we look at the rule, it will help us decide what to do in a case when we find chatzi kav b'shte amos, only half a kav in 4 amos. The next question, well, what happens if it's kavayim b'shmona amos? If the farmer were to find 2 kavim in 8 amos. So once again, we have to look at this case and compare it to the standard, which is kav be'arba amos. Mahu, what's the halacha? Kav be'arba amos, if you 1 kav in 4 amos, ta'amamai. What is the reason that you're allowed to keep it? Is it mishum de nafish tirchayu, because it's a lot of work, and based on that amount of work, we should assume the owner will not come back? V'kol sheken kavayim b'shmona amos. Then certainly, if you find 2 kavim in 8 amos, kevon de nefisha tirchayu tvei, because that's a lot more work than 1 kav in 4 amos, the area is much bigger, then mafker lehu, that we should assume that the owner abandons the grain and he makes it hefker. O dilma, or perhaps, mishum de lo chashivi, or is it perhaps that the kav in arba amos is not enough value, it's not chashuv enough? Well, if we look at the value, the kavayim b'shmona amos, so if the farmer finds 2 kavim b'shmona amos in 8 amos, kevon de chashivi, since that is more value, lo mafker lehu, then we should assume that the owner does not abandon them, it doesn't become hefker. Okay, the next case, case number 3, kav shumshemin be'arba amos. Well, what happens if you find a kav of sesame seeds in 4 amos? So far, we were focusing on a kav of wheat. But shumshemin, says Rashi, shumshemin is dakimeo. They're very, very small. Veyesh toreach bekibutzan. There's a lot more effort in gathering them. Yoser mechitin, more so than wheat. Aval demeyem bikarim. But at the same time, sesame seeds are more expensive than wheat. So therefore, the case of 1 kav of sesame seeds represents an increase in value, even though it's the same amount a kav of shumshimim like a kav of wheat, but shumshimim are more expensive. But on the other hand, it's also more work, even though the area is the same as 1 kav of wheat in 4 amos, but picking up sesame seeds in a area of 4 by 4 amos, it's more tedious. So the Gemara wants to know what happens if you find kav shumshimim be'arba amos. Mahu, what's the din? And again, we're going to compare it to the case of kav be'arba amos. Kav be'arba amos tamamai. What is the reason that we were told that the finder can keep 1 kav in 4 amos? Mai, what's the reason? Is it mishum de lo chashivi? Is it because 1 kav of wheat in 4 amos is not very valuable and there doesn't justify the effort of the owner to come back? Well, the shumshimim, but sesame seeds, kevan de chashivi, since they are more valuable, lo mafker lehu, then we should assume that the owner does not abandon them. They don't become ownerless. Or dilma, or maybe the reason for kav be'arba amos is mishum de nafish tirchayu, because it's the amount of work involved in picking up a kav of wheat in 4 amos. Well, if that's what we're measuring, the kol sheken shumshemin, then certainly sesame seeds. Kevan de nafish tirchayu tvei, since this is more work than picking up a kav of wheat in 4 amos, then we should assume mafker lehu, that the owner abandons the grain and becomes hefker. Case number 4. Kav tamre be'arba amos, kav rimoni be'arba amos. Well, what happens if they find one kav of dates in 4 amos or one kav of pomegranates in 4 amos? Again, we were told that one kav of wheat in 4 amos you can keep. Now we're switching again the fruits. It's not wheat, it's dates or pomegranates. What is special about them? Rashi explains, Temarim verimonim, dates and pomegranates, gasim hem. They are larger in size, vein toreach bekibutzan, and it's easier to pick them up. It's easier to pick up a date from the floor or a pomegranate than to pick up a few grains of wheat. So therefore, back to the Gemara. If you find a kav of dates in 4 amos or one kav of pomegranates in 4 amos, ma was the din kav yarba amos tama mai. Again, we're referring back to the kav in 4 amos. What's the reason behind that example? Is it mishum de lo chashivi? Is it because a kav of wheat is not valuable enough to justify the owner's effort to come back? Well, kav tamri be'arba amos ve'kav rimoni be'arba amos nami. Well, if you were to find a kav of dates or a kav of pomegranates in 4 amos, nami also, kevon de lo chashivi, since these are less valuable than mafker lehu, then we should assume that the owner abandons them. He has no intentions of coming back, and therefore the finder can keep them. O Dilma, or perhaps the reason behind the rule of kav be'arba amos is mishum de nafisha tirchayu, because it's a lot of work. And maybe that's the reason why the owner does not intend to come back. Well, if that's how we look at kav be'arba amos, then kav tamre be'arba amos ve'kav rimoni be'arba amos, then if you find a kav of dates or a kav of pomegranates in 4 amos, kevid de lo nafish tirchayu, since they are not a lot of work, because as Rashi explained, these are larger and therefore easier to pick up than wheat, lo mafker lehu, then we should assume that the owner does not abandon them, and therefore the finder cannot keep him. So the Gemara says, so what is the din? The Gemara answers, teiku. Teiku means it stands. It stands meaning that the question is not answered. The Gemara is not sure as to how to look at the rule of kav be'arba amos.